What's different about holiday travel than for our regular flights? Well, plenty. Pilots are human too, and we feel the same things as everyone else. Often emotions run higher during the holidays. And regardless of which holiday we're dealing with, everyone gets busier and normal schedules are disrupted. Stress and fatigue levels rise. Autumn and winter holidays add additional challenges for pilots as the days get shorter and the weather often takes a turn for the worse. In this webinar, we're going to look at some of the pitfalls of holiday travel, but more importantly, we're going to examine some ways to avoid or mitigate some of those problems. I don't need to tell you where the exits are. Like in a regular in-person seminar, our emergency would be some sort of a system crash. If that happens, check your email and we'll do something about rescheduling. Your attendance at this event may qualify you to earn the Basic Knowledge 3 Wings credit. To be eligible, you must be logged in for most of the session and participate in most of the polls. Your poll response doesn't matter. It's not a test. It just proves that you were participating and not just logged in. That's the deal I made with the FAA. There's two options for giving credit on webinars. You can give an online quiz that people have to take, or you can just prove that they were there by, we got a detailed report afterward and poll responses. Doesn't matter what you answer, you just need to answer. All right, sorting the data and issuing the credit for this is a little bit time consuming, so please give me a week to get that done. My intent is to have it done tomorrow. I almost always have it done on the day after the events, but just in case something else comes up, bear with me on that one. All right, in case you didn't know, Avemco is a sponsor of the FAASTeam, and they pay for the wings that we receive when we complete a phase of wings. This webinar qualifies for the Avemco Safety Rewards Program. At the end of the presentation, I will tell you how you might be eligible for a discount on your aircraft insurance for attending this webinar, so stay tuned. Well, my name is Gene Benson. I'll be your host and presenter for the webinar. I've been flying and teaching about flying for a very long time. I've operated an aviation safety initiative since 2003. I felt compelled to take some action to improve safety after I had 5 friends involved in 5 separate serious accidents over a 5-year period. 5 is the magic number there. Well, 4 of those pilots died, and 1 was left with life-changing injuries. Now, all 5 of these individuals were highly qualified, experienced, responsible pilots. There were no hot doggers in there, no lackeys. These people all knew what they were doing. Now, 4 of the 5 made their living by flying, and the 5th had a different profession, but he was a flight instructor, and he was giving instruction at the time of the crash. I'll be analyzing one of those accidents near the end of the webinar today. I believe that we can all be safer by constantly learning more and frequently reviewing what we already know. So it is with that spirit that we offer the Vectors for Safety website and the monthly newsletter, Vectors for Safety. On the controls with me today is Radosh Vernica. Radosh describes himself as a certified pilot and an avid aviation learner. He has a PhD in computer science. He's currently working in the high-tech industry. He's also a volunteer with the Sheriff's Search and Rescue team. And I really appreciate him helping today, volunteering to assist with this presentation. He's already provided valuable behind-the-scenes advice and improving the webinars, and he'll be running the Q&A for us today. So with that, we'll begin. We'll turn our webcams off. There goes mine. That'll give you a full screen view, and we begin. Many of you know I've talked about, written about, made videos about the task load versus capabilities graph. We're not going into that now. There's a link to my YouTube video on the subject on the webinar reference page. For now, let's just accept that we want to keep our capabilities curve as high as possible. A key element in keeping our capabilities high is to be as proficient as possible. How is our pilot proficiency looking? Did we skip or postpone recurrent training or proficiency flying due to the pandemic? The time change plus the time of year makes darkness come earlier. How is our night recent experience looking? Remember, we're not always flying over well-lit areas with a horizon reference. Are we prepared to do some actual IFR flying? What about recent experience requirements? Are we really prepared even though we might meet regulatory requirements? We all know there's a difference. We have to be honest with ourselves. This is not a time to let optimism bias influence our decisions. And with that, we're going to launch our first poll of the day. And there it goes. Are you planning a holiday trip in a general aviation airplane this year? There's obviously no wrong answer here. Well, quite a few people are. There's 80% of the folks have indicated they have an answer. All right, we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Poll is closed, and we will share that result. Oh no, I was looking at it backwards. 65% are not. All right. Thank you for your participation in that. All right. One important way to keep our task load low, remember we want to keep our capabilities high and our task load low. One way to keep that task load low is to fly a healthy airplane. We want to have an uneventful flight and not have to deal with a mechanical problem along the way. Did we skip or postpone maintenance due to the pandemic? Is the airplane really fit to go? Let's make sure of that, and let's make sure at least a couple days prior to the holiday trip. If we find a problem with the airplane when everybody's waiting to get on board or everybody's already loaded in, our brain might convince us that, oh, well, it'll be okay this time and I'll deal with it later. We're not going to spend much time on flight planning because you all know what needs to be done and you all know how to do it. Of course, we shouldn't have to say that it's always important to make sure we're within weight and balance limits and that we've calculated our takeoff and climb performance for all the airports we plan to use, but also for any airports along the way that we might need to use. If there's an airsick passenger or we decide we need fuel or whatever else might come along. And of course, a good weather briefing is essential. We all have our own preferences on how to obtain that. There are many different ways today. We need to be sure that both the pilot and the airplane are up to the tasks involved in handling any weather that we might encounter. I have a lot of accidents cataloged where, an airline pilot flew as a Ronca into bad weather and crashed and died. I mean, that kind of thing happens all the time. So let's make sure it's both us and the airplane that are in good shape. So we're ready for our flight. Everything is perfect, right? Yeah, probably not everything. We live in the real world. I could tell you should never fly if everything isn't perfect, but that's not really very realistic. I'd be a hypocrite if I told you that I have never flown when something is not perfect. Usually it's the weather that's not perfect, but it could be something else. The key is to be smart about it and make rational decisions. You've all heard this one, right? Is it legal? Is it smart? Is it safe? Well, that's a great evaluation, but it's not that simple. Let's look at how we might evaluate the safe part. For the safe part of that, we might look at the risk assessment matrix. I know you've all seen this before. We're going to look at two examples here. First, take the case of the pilot who's planning a holiday flight over mountainous terrain, and the weather forecast mentions the possibility of severe turbulence. The pilot estimates that the likelihood of actually encountering the condition is occasional. The pilot also knows that the severity of the consequences of the rotor clouds and the severe turbulence is critical. The risk, therefore, falls into the yellow or serious risk area. Now, in theory, the pilot can make an informed decision as to whether or not to begin the flight. But can that pilot really make a good decision? Let's say the pilot just had a Thanksgiving weekend away with the spouse and 2 kids. It's Sunday afternoon. The pilot and the pilot's spouse both have jobs, both have important meetings on Monday morning. Now, those meetings are virtual, but the internet where they've been staying isn't very strong. One of the kids is in high school and has an important virtual exam on Monday morning. Again, that weak internet in that rural area is a factor. The pilot's unconscious mind just might weigh in on that decision. Now, the pilot estimates that the likelihood of actually encountering the condition is improbable, but stays with the severity of the consequences as critical. So therefore, the risk falls into the green or the medium risk area. Now, it's much easier to make the decision to begin the flight. The unconscious mind has perhaps just lured our pilot into the trap of making a bad decision. With that, we're going to look at our next poll. And there it goes. Which, if any, of these guys do you use when considering a flight? And you can click all that apply there. It's not a one choice situation. Now we're up to 48%, 54%, 60%, 74%, 77, 81. Good. All right. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, close, share. All right. Interesting. Interesting. Everybody uses something, and that's good. I'm impressed to see how many people are using a personal minimums checklist. That's a valuable one. I'm impressed. Good job. All right. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this whole situation. What's the secret to safe holiday flying? There's always a spike in serious aviation accidents around any major holiday. For the most part, the pilots involved, they're experienced, and they're generally in compliance with regulations. Yet they had a serious accident. So there must be some secret that they don't know about. So let's expose that secret. Wait for it. Yes, the secret is to make better decisions. But it's not that easy. We can be experts on aerodynamics, aircraft performance, weather, aircraft systems. We can be outstanding stick and rudder pilots. But our humanness can fool us into making a bad decision, and that is what is behind most serious accidents. Most serious accidents result from one or more bad decisions. We know that because many NTSB accident probable cause findings state the pilot's decision to, and then they go on to explain the decision. I have a very short video that I would like to show you on the subject. All right. A little dramatic, but it is the truth. We see that phrase, the pilot's decision, in many accident reports. All right. We frequently hear the term get-there-itis. Accident reports seem to indicate the cases of get-there-itis are more common around the holidays. I think we intuitively know what get-there-itis means. We want to get to our destination, so we ignore danger signs and we press on. But if we are going to fight get-there-itis, we need to have a better understanding of some of the elements that contribute to it and some ways to mitigate those effects. Let's begin by looking at some human factors, influences, and how they might influence our decision making. One contributor to get-there-itis is a sense of duty. Many of us have close relatives a few hundred miles away. We might believe it's our duty to spend a holiday with an elderly parent or a sibling who would otherwise be alone. We might also feel a sense of commitment. Maybe we're taking a portion of a holiday meal. Maybe the family was gathering to discuss some important family matter. Maybe we had promised to help with a project while we were there. Maybe we don't want to disappoint someone who has been looking forward to our visit. Maybe we have a sense of pride in being a pilot. We don't want to appear incapable or incompetent. Maybe there's a touch of sibling rivalry and we want to be the one who flies in. Maybe we want to look good for the in-laws. Lots of possibilities. Maybe it's simply more convenient to fly than to drive. A couple hours in the airplane, hey, a lot more convenient than 5 hours in the car, especially if there's kids involved, right? All right, we're all capable of evaluating what needs to be evaluated before a flight and making a logical, carefully considered decision on whether or not to fly. And then also continuing to make logical decisions as the flight progresses. But when we introduce any of these or possibly hundreds of other external factors, we want to make the flight so our brains start to apply some cognitive biases to influence our decisions. Cognitive bias, it's a systematic pattern of deviation from the norm or rationality and judgment. Individuals create their own subjective reality from their perception of the input. Let's see a little bit more about this. I'm going to attempt to show you something. 3 of these cognitive biases frequently work together to produce what I call the bias bundle bomb. And here's a short video that I created.
So we will talk about 3 cognitive biases that we all possess as human beings. I refer to them as the bias bundle bomb. Here is our first bomb of the bundle. It's called illusory superiority. We all overestimate our own qualities and abilities relative to others. This has been demonstrated many, many times by various psychological experiments. We all think we're a little smarter, luckier, or whatever than the next person. Those bad things happen to other people, not to me. If you don't believe that, talk to a smoker. The evidence is overwhelming that smoking is deadly, yet most smokers will deny the facts. They don't really believe that anything bad will happen to them. Then for our second bomb, we have optimism bias. We all believe that we are less at risk of experiencing a negative event compared to others. We believe that things will go our way. Our illustration here is the popularity of gambling. Whether it be slot machines or lottery tickets, the odds are always greatly against the player. Yet people lose billions of dollars every year because they are optimistic about winning. And the final bomb in our bias bundle bomb, we have something called confirmation blindness. That means we have a tendency to stick with a decision even when it is a bad one. Have you ever known somebody, or maybe even have been that somebody, who claimed to have gotten a really great deal on a used car and continued to make that claim even with weekly visits to the repair shop? Even when all the evidence shows that a decision was not a good one, our brains filter out the contradictory facts and allow only supporting facts to get through. Let's take a look at a scenario from general aviation. We have an unsettled weather day. The forecast calls for VFR with a chance of occasional IFR with low clouds and rain. Our pilot has about 400 hours total time. He is a non-instrument rated private pilot, and he has not practiced any instrument flight in 2 years. The airplane is a 1974 Cessna 172 with its original avionics and no autopilot. So here's the first bomb in our bundle. Our pilot, in his humanness, believes that he is good enough as a pilot and that he can handle the weather. Then for the second bomb, his optimism bias tells him that the weather will really be fine regardless of what the forecast says. And for the final bomb in our bundle, confirmation blindness causes our pilot to filter out facts such as lack of ground contact. Instead, he sees only evidence that the situation is really fine and that his original decision to depart was correct. And sometimes that bias bundle bomb explodes and we have an accident caused by our humanness.
So how do we protect ourselves from these human factor risks, the bias bundle bomb and others? Let's review some very basic mitigation tools. We're all familiar with the I'm Safe checklist. Many of you indicated that you use that. It warns us about flying when we are ill, taking medications, under stress, have consumed alcohol recently, fatigue, inadequately nourished. And it's a good guide, but we have to use it with caution. It's also subjective and therefore vulnerable to our cognitive biases. When it comes to decision making, objective is better than subjective. let's quickly look at some other tools that are more objective in nature. Many of you indicated you used a personal minimums checklist. I applaud you for that. Establishing our personal minimums well in advance of planning a flight can really help us overcome get-there-itis. We establish our minimums ahead of time, and we also create adjustments to be applied if those conditions are different, if conditions warrant. We should share these limitations with our passengers. Let our passengers know ahead of time that this is general aviation. We're not the airlines. There's simply times when we cannot fly and that they should make alternate arrangements if this trip is critical. Links to more information on this on the webinar reference page, which I'll tell you how to get to at the end of the webinar. Now, one of my favorite tools is the Flight Risk Assessment Tool, or the FRAT. Again, we set this up ahead of time and we score points based on pre-established risks. Exceeding an established value indicates that we should not fly. But now sometimes we can lower the score by changing one element. Now, for example, maybe we can change our departure time so that we will arrive at our destination in daylight rather than after dark. Now, that might lower the score enough that we're okay. We can go and fly. Again, there's more of this on the webinar reference page. Lately, I've been coaching pilots on personalizing the Flight Risk Assessment Tool and the Personal Minimums Checklist. I think it's a very, very important tool. All right. That's the preliminary stuff. Now let's analyze some accidents. We're going to look at some accident examples. We don't do this to criticize any pilot. We're all human. We're all capable of making errors. We do this so that we might learn some lessons on how to be safer pilots. You see here my standard disclaimer that I put on the website when I analyze accidents. All right. Now, this fatal accident involved a Cessna 172. It happened in Vermont, November 22nd, 2017. You know what that holiday that was around, right? The NTSB report includes the following, quote, "The 89-year-old commercial pilot departed on a cross-country flight late on the day before Thanksgiving to visit relatives. He received 2 weather briefings in the 2 days before the flight, with the most recent briefing the day before the flight indicating widespread marginal visual flight rules conditions and mountain obscuration. The briefer advised the pilot that VFR flight was not recommended. Despite the conditions presented during the weather briefing, the pilot chose to conduct flight under VFR and indicated to the briefer that he did not want to fly through clouds with potential icing conditions." End quote from the NTSB report. And then more from the NTSB report, quote, "GPS track data downloaded from the unit on board the accident airplane indicated that the flight began uneventfully, with the pilot following a highway, likely for route guidance. As the flight progressed, the airplane's altitude began to decrease. This is consistent with the reported weather conditions and the pilot attempting to remain clear of the clouds since he was not on an instrument flight rules plan and did not want to fly through the clouds. Near a location where the highway turned west through a town and around terrain, the airplane continued straight and flew along a valley between 2 ridges. The airplane made 2 turns within the valley, then made a left turn to the west, possibly in an attempt to return to the highway. While heading toward the highway and after crossing the ridge, the airplane entered a descending right turn. The GPS data ended about 750 feet from the accident site and indicated that the airplane was about 425 feet above ground level. Examination of the airplane, engine, flight controls, and instruments did not reveal any pre-impact anomalies that would have precluded normal operation. Also included in the NTSB report, quote, "Based on the available information, it is likely that the pilot inadvertently encountered instrument meteorological conditions while maneuvering the airplane in deteriorating light conditions near the end of civil twilight. Although the pilot was instrument rated, no determination of his recent instrument flight experience could be made. He was likely not prepared for the sudden entry into instrument conditions and the loss of visibility combined with the turns and varying altitudes while attempting to exit the valley resulted in spatial disorientation and a subsequent loss of airplane control." Quote, NTSB writes very long sentences. Just a quick note on that, the sudden entry instrument conditions. I noticed I'm one of those old pilots. I'm not 89, but I'm one of those older pilots. And I've noticed that the older I get, the longer it takes me to transition from one thing to another, even driving the car, going into rain or coming out of rain or something. So it is something to think about as we get a little bit older, that we don't adapt quite as quickly as we used to. All right, the NTSB probable cause finding states, quote, the pilot's decision to continue visual flight into instrument meteorological conditions, which resulted in a loss of control due to spatial disorientation, end quote. And we have that phrase again, the pilot's decision. All right, several common accident causal factors are illustrated by this accident. First, the accident happened on the day before Thanksgiving. The pilot was making the flight to spend the holiday with family. We know how powerful those external factors can be on a pilot's decision-making. His most recent weather briefing was the day before the flight, not even the day of the flight. Apparently, he had already made up his mind that he was going to fly. And our brain just does that to us, just convinces us that it'll be okay. Now, what human factors do we have as probable causal factors in this accident? Well, first, let's consider the pilot's decision to conduct the flight. He perhaps had a sense of duty to spend Thanksgiving with the family. He had probably made a commitment to be present. The pilot had been flying for years and probably suffered from the very human phenomenon of illusory superiority. We all do. Optimism bias probably played a role also. Bad things happen to other people. Then during the flight, continuation bias played a role. It's against our humanness to turn back once we have begun something. And then for the operational error or errors, he clearly was not proficient to fly IFR, as he made the decision to go VFR, which was simply not possible. All right, before we continue on, Brothers, do you have anything we should be talking about? Any questions that have come up?
No, Gene, no questions related to the content.
Okay, all right, in that case, we will continue on. All right, another example. This accident happened on Christmas Eve morning in 2017 in Florida, killing 5 people. The airplane was a Cessna 340. A local news report states the following, and I'm going to leave out the last names in this report. And the quote from the local news, just leaving out the last names. Attorney John, age 70, of Lakeland, was piloting the airplane that came down in dense fog shortly after takeoff at 7:15 a.m. Sunday at Bartow Municipal Airport. All aboard died in impact. His 2 daughters, Olivia, 24, and Victoria, 26, Victoria's newlywed husband, Peter, age 27, and family friend, Krista, age 32. Krista, the mother of an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old, had touched the lives of hundreds of other children as an elementary teacher in Polk County schools. For at least 5 years, she was a 6th grade history teacher at Discovery Academy in Lake Alfred. For the past year and a half, Krista taught at Jewett School for the Arts in Winter Haven. Now from the NTSB accident report, quote, the instrument-rated private pilot and 4 passengers boarded the multi-engine airplane inside a hangar. The pilot then requested that the airplane be towed from the hangar to the ramp since he did not want to hit anything on the ramp while taxiing in dense fog, end quote. Now this is what you're seeing there is a screenshot from a video of the airplane beginning to taxi. Kind of foggy out there. This is a takeoff video screenshot from the NTSB accident docket. The NTSB accident report includes the following, quote, a witness video recorded the takeoff, but the airplane was not visible due to the dense fog. During the takeoff roll, the airplane's tires chirped, which is consistent with the wheels touching down on the runway with a side load. The video ended before the accident occurred. The witness stated that the takeoff continued and they heard the airplane impact the ground and saw an explosion. The weather conditions at the time of the accident included visibility less than 1/4 mile in fog and an overcast ceiling at 300 feet above ground level. And just an aside, the pilot was legal making that takeoff. This was a Part 91 operation, and there are no takeoff minimums. Part 135, Part 121, you have takeoff minimums, but you can take off 00 legally in under Part 91 operations. Also from the NTSB report, quote, the airplane's weight at the time of the accident was about 105 pounds over the maximum takeoff weight, which exceeded the center of gravity moment envelope. This excess weight would have likely extended the takeoff roll, decreased the climb rate, and increased the amount of elevator pressure required to lift off the runway, end quote. And the probable cause, according to the NTSB, the pilot's loss of control due to spatial disorientation during takeoff in instrument meteorological conditions. What human factors? Well, first we have to consider the pilot's decision to conduct the flight. He perhaps had a sense of duty to take the family to the planned activities on Christmas Eve. The pilot was a prominent attorney and a politician. I don't know anything about him personally, but perhaps there was some perceived competency transfer. And that is when someone is very successful in one field, they sometimes exhibit excess illusory superiority in other areas. They think it sort of transfers over. Optimism bias probably played a role also. Bad things happen to other people again. And for the operational error or errors, we don't have enough information here. Did the pilot lose control simply because of a lack of proficiency, or did something go wrong to distract him? And I want to go back to that 0-0 takeoff just a little bit before we leave this. I admit that I have done that, but I think I was smart about the way I did it. You know, what's the obvious pitfall in doing that? Well, what if you got to come back? We don't have takeoff minimums, but we do have landing minimums. So coming back would certainly be problematic. But I did it a number of times. I was flying out of Concord, New Hampshire in a Piper Navajo heading to the south. And directly south of the Concord airport by, I'm not sure now, 20, 25 miles maybe, was Manchester, New Hampshire airport. Full ILS, lined right up there. And you didn't have to, you know, you could be up a very short amount of time, realize you had a problem, and go ahead and descend into Manchester. Manchester tended to be clear. The location of Concord on the Merrimack River was just such that fog rolled in there, but Manchester, 25 miles to the south, would be absolutely clear. So you'd be making a VFR landing at Manchester. I would never do it if there was fog everywhere in the area, but it is legal. As I think back on it, was it smart? Probably not all that smart, but it was legal. All right. And our final accident to talk about today. This accident is appropriate for the presentation because the purpose of the flight was related to the holidays. This one's a little bit difficult for me to talk about because the pilot who lost his life in this accident was a friend of mine. Now, I can tell you unequivocally that this guy was professional and he was competent. If it could happen to him, it could happen to any of us if we let our guard down a bit. The accident happened, this was hard to believe, almost 20 years ago. Happened on December 22nd, 2000. The airplane was a Beech B-200 King Air. The pilot had more than 15,500 hours. He was a Part 135 charter pilot. He was a designated pilot examiner, and he owned a flight school. Now, you might think that this accident isn't relevant to your flying if you're not flying a multi-engine turboprop airplane in a charter operation. But the causal factors are not specific to the kind of airplane or to the experience of the pilot or what the operation was. They're just human factors, and they affect any of us regardless of the kind of flying that we do. So let's look at this one. The accident happened at 5:16 local time, 5:16 p.m. local time, December 22nd, 2000 at Rangeley, Maine. Now, dark night conditions prevailed with a solid overcast. There were snow showers in the area. Remember, this is one day after the shortest day of the year, so it was dark. It was quite dark by 5:16, and it's a mountainous area. But the accident sequence didn't start then. The accident sequence actually started early that morning. The accident pilot had been ill. He'd been sick in bed for 2 or 3 days, and he got out of bed that morning. He probably had the flu. I'm not sure exactly what it was. But however, on the morning of the accident, he'd been scheduled for a Part 135 flight check with the FAA inspector. That's to continue his charter operation. So there's some pressure to do it. Who knows, you know, he probably wouldn't have been able to reschedule it for a while. He successfully completed that check ride in a Piper Navajo Chieftain, which he owned, and that's similar to the one shown in the graphic here. Now, personally, having taken many Part 135 flight checks, I can attest to the fact that they are demanding, they're stressful, they're tiring, they're downright a pain. Well, we won't go that way. Anyway, after the check ride, the accident pilot flew the Beech King Air B-200, the accident airplane, from Rangeley to Boston Logan International Airport to pick up a passenger and take that passenger back to Rangeley. Now, Boston Logan, very busy airport, lots of airline traffic. Navigating on the surface of that airport is a nightmare as far as I'm concerned. It can be challenging to say the least. He picked up his passenger for the return flight to Rangeley. However, the day wasn't over yet. The passenger was also the leaseback owner of the King Air, so he had some clout here. He was also a friend of the pilot. And that airplane was a very important part of the charter company. Now, the passenger requested that instead of returning directly to Rangeley, they land at Portland, Maine, so that he could accomplish his Christmas shopping at the mall. So they departed IFR to Portland and landed. And with Christmas shopping complete, they departed Portland IFR to Rangeley. Now remember, it's dark, there's snow showers in the area, and it's mountainous terrain. The NTSB report includes the following, quote, after departing Portland, the airplane climbed to an en route altitude of 11,000 feet MSL. Approximately 29 miles to the southwest of Rangeley, the pilot was cleared to 6,000 feet MSL. At 17 miles southwest, the pilot was cleared for the GPS Alpha approach and was instructed to cross the Rangeley non-directional beacon at 5,800 feet MSL. At 9 miles, the pilot reported the airport in sight and canceled his IFR clearance. The pilot was instructed to squawk VFR and that a frequency change to advisory was approved. Then the report continues. The pilot radioed his wife, who was waiting at the airport, and told her he was on base for runway 32. At 7.9 miles from the airport, the airplane collided with a 3,125-foot mountain about 100 feet from the top. An air and ground search was commenced about 45 minutes after the accident, but was later postponed until morning because of the weather. The airplane was located the next morning on the southwest side of a 3,125-foot mountain about 100 feet from the top. NTSB probable cause finding states, quote, the pilot and command's failure to maintain sufficient altitude while maneuvering to land, which resulted in the collision with terrain. Factors in the accident were the dark night, mountainous terrain, snow showers, clouds, and the pilot's decision to cancel his IFR clearance. And again, there's that phrase, the IFR, the pilot's decision, okay? And just before we look at the probable cause factors here, human factors, if he'd continued the approach, he would have had to have made a procedure turn, and it cut about 6 minutes off the approach by canceling IFR and continuing into the airport to save 6 minutes instead of flying the full approach, which would have most certainly kept him safe. He canceled IFR. Little fatigue maybe working there. All right, what human factors do we have as a probable causal factor in this accident? Well, first, we consider the pilot's decision to conduct the flight. He would have had a sense of duty to get his passenger to Rangeley for his family celebration. The passenger was the leaseback owner of the airplane, but also the pilot's friend. He'd made a commitment, and he would have wanted to honor it. Any of us who have accomplished what this pilot had accomplished in the aviation world would have a bit of illusory superiority. And the fact that the pilot had flown into this airport hundreds of times and weathered much worse than this would feed our optimism bias. And then for the operational errors, the pilot was still ill to some degree. He wouldn't have passed the I'm safe checklist. Anyone would be fatigued after doing what he had done on this day. We don't know about the presence of meds. Due to the severity of the crash, there wasn't sufficient tissue available for toxicology analysis. However, had he been taking an over-the-counter med containing diphenhydramine, the impairing effects can last several days after the last dose. The information regarding the severity of impairment from diphenhydramine wasn't publicly available at the time of this accident. That's a more recent thing. You know what? I've talked before about diphenhydramine. That's the active ingredient in Benadryl and a lot of over-the-counter decongestants. And it's in many sleep aids as well. And the NTSB recommends not flying for 60 hours after the last dose of anything containing diphenhydramine. And that information was not out in the year 2000, at least not out for pilots. All right. I guess before we do summary on this, any questions, anything for discussion?
Yes, Gene. We have one on the 00 takeoffs. Let me read it how Juan posted it. Why Part 91 allows 00 takeoffs when an airliner won't be allowed? Is there a problem with this regulation?
Well, when you ask why and the FAA in the same sentence, my answer will almost always be, I don't know. You know, they try to give general aviation a little more leeway than the airlines because they're obligated to protect the paying passengers. And on the charter operations, it's the same thing. Had that you're referring to the crash in Florida where the attorney was taking off and crashed in 00 weather. That was his own airplane. It was not a charter. There were no paying passengers on board, so we're allowed a little bit more leeway. Hopefully, we'll execute better judgment on that. The airliners, paying passengers, the FAA's duty is to protect the public, the flying public, and I suppose that's why that is strict. I never had a problem with the 00 takeoffs. I mean, you can always see the runway. They say 0, but it's never really 0. You can always see the center line of the runway ahead of you. And, as soon as you get to rotation speed, you pull back and now you're flying IFR. You're solid in the clouds, in the fog. It doesn't matter if you're 50 feet over the ground or 5,000 feet over the ground, you're still in the clouds. So it really wasn't that big a deal to do it. The problem for me would be, if I had to come back, and that's why I made sure there was an airport that I could get to. Would I do it today? Not in your life, but then again, I'm older and maybe a little bit wiser, but I wouldn't do it today, and I really wouldn't recommend that anybody else do it. Anything else?
Yes, we have a couple of more coming in. Ernie is asking, why cancel even if you have the airport in sight? Why not ask for vectors for a straight-in approach to make it easy?
Well, there wouldn't have been any vectors available there because of the mountainous terrain, and the radar didn't go down that low. I've flown into that airport several times, and anything below about 6,000 feet or so, the radar doesn't see you there anymore. So no vectors, but canceling the IFR approach, it was an NDB approach, which we don't even have anymore. They call it a GPS approach, but it relied on the NDB. Those approaches are kind of a pain, and there's a procedure turn, which would have meant he would have had to make a 360-degree turn, fly a racetrack pattern, another 180-degree turn, fly a racetrack pattern, and then another 180-degree turn to return to course. That's just to make sure you're established on the course, and then it would have descended after a point that was, past the mountains. If the weather's really good and clear, it's fine. There's really no reason to do that. The weather wasn't clear. There were snow showers in the area. Some people have said, oh, he didn't really have the airport in sight. He just, thought he knew where he was. I doubt that. Knowing the guy, he was pretty good. I suspect what happened was now he's operating under fatigue. There's no question about that. He saw the airport and said, oh, I got it made. Let's just get in there, get on the ground. I'm tired, kind of thing. So he canceled the IFR, and then I'm guessing he flew into some snow showers and probably lost track of exactly where he was, thought he was beyond that mountain, and descended a little bit to try and see the airport again. What should he have done? Think about that. What should he have done? Missed approach, right? Power up, missed approach, climb out. As soon as you don't see the airport anymore, that's what he should have done. Go back and shoot another approach. But now you're looking at another 10 minutes, 15 minutes probably to get back, lined up, fly the approach again. And, you know, it's just his humanness. He was tired. He wanted to get on the ground. He was done for the day. And he kept going. I don't know. No voice recording in there. I don't know what was going on, but that would be my guess. But generally speaking, if you're not in crystal clear weather, don't cancel the IFR approach. So, because I've done that. Oh, I got the airport inside looking good, and then you look back up and the airport's not there anymore. But then it's time to get out of Dodge. Power up, missed approach, take your medicine, do it again. Anything else?
Yes, a few more.
Good.
Ashley is asking, what is the best way to go about creating a personal minimums list? What about the other resources you mentioned?
Well, it's too lengthy to go into that. I'm just, so as long as we're going to chat for a little bit here, I'm just going to turn my webcam back on. There we go. Yeah, there we go. There's a lot to it. It's not something we can quickly say go about. When we're through with the webinar, I'm going to show you how to get to a reference page that I created online for the webinar, and on there are all kinds of links. The FAA has some very good products out there to help us create those things. They have examples and they have articles and so on to do it. And I also should mention on that those things are not static documents. They should be considered dynamic documents. Let's say we create either a flight risk assessment tool, a FRAT, or a personal minimums checklist today. All right, is that good forever and always? Of course not. Let's say, you know, we go 6 months and we don't fly. Well, I think we should make adjustments to those if we don't do that because we're not as proficient. Or we go out and get another rating or do a lot of flying, take a whole bunch of training, and we brush up our skills, or we take a bunch of online courses. Maybe now we can be a little bit more aggressive on our minimums in our flight risk assessment tool. It should change. You know, we should probably, I recommend reviewing it every 6 months and seeing what's there. But the important element there is, you know, you're going to have something written down. It's in stone. I'm not going to fly if this does not meet this. And we got our passengers know ahead of time. We tell them, you know, make alternate arrangements, and we should have alternate arrangements in our mind too, because if we can't go, and I've done that. We had, I think I've told this story on webinars before. Quite a few years ago, I'm in the Rochester, New York area, and I'm right on the south shore of Lake Ontario. We had friends that lived in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, right directly north of us. It was 60 miles across the lake. That was about a 45-minute drive, or 45-minute flight in my Beach Duchess. It was a 5-hour drive in a car because we had to go west, cross the border, go through the Toronto traffic, and then head back east to get to Peterborough. It was a process. Well, the man that we were friends with passed away, and of course we wanted to go to the funeral. And it was my wife and I and 2 other family members wanted to go to the funeral. And the logical thing was to fly the Duchess across the lake. And I did all the, we'd done that before to go visit. So, you know, I was familiar with the process. We'd done that. We got our clearance and everything to go. And the weather was really bad. And the airport at Peterborough only had a localizer approach, didn't have an ILS. Toronto, of course, had everything, but to land at Toronto and then get a rental car and drive to Peterborough wasn't, you know, it just wasn't, that wasn't going to be efficient either. So I didn't trust myself. It was forecast to be right down to localizer minimums. And I said, you know what, we're going to look at it really closely in the morning, but I want everybody to be at the airport, that we have time to drive to be there for the funeral if that, you know, if the weather isn't good. And it was time to, you know, it was time to go if we were going to leave time to drive. So I evaluated the weather, and it was right at localizer minimums, and I didn't trust myself. I didn't. I said, you know what, if I get over there and I shoot this localizer approach and I don't, it doesn't work, I don't break out, okay, I'll do a missed approach, but I'll probably try it again. The second time I might cheat. I might say, well, I can drop down another 50 feet. I might, you know, and that's how people get killed when they do that. So I said, nope, we're not going to do that. I'm sorry. We all piled into the car and we drove over and we got there just in time for the funeral and we drove home and everybody's still alive. Now, would it have worked out all right? Probably, if we flown, but maybe not. We're all still alive. Nobody was terribly inconvenienced. You know, it worked. So that's why we do that stuff. We don't trust ourselves when it's really important. What else we got, Rodriguez?
Another I think good one from Johannes. What steps could be taken to increase PIC really in command, in quotes? My ideas. Insist on the decision making, risk mitigation, training and instruction by submitting pilots, students or learners, as well as existing pilots during check flights, flight reviews. Your ideas?
Well, you know, all of that. We just want to be as proficient as we can, and we do that by learning. You know, like what you're doing now. You're on this webinar, and that may give you a little, you know, edge up on something, and then you do somebody else's webinar. You read an article, you read a book, you watch videos. You learn a little bit all the time from all that stuff, and then of course we have to go out and either do it in the airplane or I'm a big fan of simulation because you can, you know, if it's a good simulator, you can set up situations that really task us. We go out and we put the hood on and we fly around our home airport and shoot a couple of approaches, or we just go out and do a few steep turns and stuff. That helps. Everything is good, but you know, we just have to keep going. I'm a fan of having a real recurrent training. My background, you know, I was a professional pilot. I had to take recurrent training. I didn't have any choice. It wasn't my choice. Sometimes I was looking forward to it. Sometimes I was like, oh, no, I got to do this again. But that's how we stayed safe. We'd go to recurrent training, and the people putting on the recurrent training kept track of what the accidents were, what the incidents were, how can we avoid doing some of these things? And it worked out really well. You know, always learn something going to recurrent training. So I think for general aviation, we can create our own recurrent training. We went every 6 months. We would do one cycle would be ground school, 2 days of ground school, and then the next time was in the simulator. Okay, you can set up your own system. You can do what you want, but you should try to do something every 6 months. You know, whether it be something on the ground or something flying. And especially now with the pandemic, there's been a lot written lately about, you know, pilots having accidents. Maybe not fatal accidents, but going off runways and things like that because the proficiency has slipped. And I know there are cases where the airplanes aren't as well maintained, you know, as they might be either. It's hard to get maintenance. And, well, okay, we'll just put that off for now. Well, maybe not a good idea. Actually, so all of the above.
Yeah, so those I think are very good points on training and recurrent training. But I think the question was more on decision making and risk mitigation training. How do you train for that?
Okay. Yep. Well, of course, decision making and risk mitigation are really parts of the ground training. Shameless plug. I have if you go onto the Vector's website, I have it's called Human Factors Ground School, and it's about a 6-hour program that goes through and handles all that risk mitigation, decision making. We just scratched the surface on some of those things tonight, but it's a bunch of videos that I made. It goes pretty deeply into it. There's all kinds of stuff out there on that. The most important thing we can remember on any of that is we can't be trusted. When the chips are down, we can't be trusted. We have to you know, put our own handcuffs on us that prevent us from doing crazy things because our brain, all kinds of estimates on cognitive decision making, but probably 3/4 of the decisions we make are made in the unconscious mind, not in the conscious mind. And that's where the mischief happens, in the unconscious mind. We want to do something, so we arrange the reality in our own mind to make it work, you know, to do that. So we have to find ways to recognize that. I practice that all the time because I've done things. I think it was a couple of years ago. What do we do with sour stairs, especially older? I'm in my 70s. Shouldn't we be very careful about falls? Well, I'm I'm in very good physical condition for my age. I run 2 miles every morning. I'm in great shape. But I went down in the basement to get something, and I was in a hurry, so I had something in both my hands. I don't remember what it was now. It was both hands, and I ran up the stairs. About a halfway up the stairs, I tripped, and I made my way back down the stairs in a way that I really did not want to. I was very fortunate. I was sore for a couple of days. I didn't break anything, didn't get any sprains or anything. But then, that made me realize I know all this stuff. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I did it. My humanness got in the way, and I did it. So I do things like, for example, I have a pretty good sized yard. I do all the yard work, but whenever I'm using the leaf blower or the weed whacker, the safety glasses go on. I wear regular glasses, but the safety glasses go on over the top of them. And I used to say, oh, they're in the garage. Oh, it'll be all right this time. I don't anymore. After doing all this work on this stuff, I've convinced myself, don't trust yourself. It won't, it'll probably be okay, but don't bet on it. Your eyesight is worth more than that. Make the extra jaunt into the garage to get the safety glasses and put them on. And I try to practice what I preach. I still slip up sometimes, but I try to practice what I preach with it. That's my tirade for today. What else do we have?
Here's an interesting comment from Stephen. My part 135, 10 or more passenger experience with flight risk assessment tools is the following. Pilots mitigate risks away in order to do the flight. Aspen in the winter, Sand Valley in the winter, and so on.
You're saying they write it? They write the risk assessment tool so they can get in or go?
They tweak it so it goes away.
Okay. Well, we can fool ourselves on anything that we want to fool ourselves. I spent 5 years on the safety committee of NBAA, and NBAA, most of those flights in the business jets are under Part 91, so you can do what you want. But NBAA was really big in, flight risk assessment tools. That was something that they were really pushing at the time and assisting business operators. Usually it's not the pilot that creates it for the business operation, it's the company that creates it, and they may have a couple different ones based on the experience of the pilot. A senior captain with 20,000 hours might have a different flight risk assessment tool than a junior captain with 5,000 hours. But they work it out, and they're pretty good about enforcing it. They generally, it isn't the pilot's sole decision to go. The pilot, the dispatcher has, or somebody, chief pilot, whatever, has veto power over the flight too, and can check the weather and say, no, you're not going to go today. It's quite an interesting dynamic there, because typically you're maybe flying the CEO of the company around, and killing the CEO is not good for anybody's career in the company. So they tend to be very careful about it. But I'm sure that goes on. We can tweak it. It's the same with the personal minimums checklist. You can tweak it so that you can go, but that just defeats the purpose. If you're going to do that, why bother with it? Just say, okay, I'm not going to do this stuff. I'm going to go. Happens.
Yeah. So Susan is asking, what are some quick tips for surprise weather to keep in mind?
Well, first of all, for surprise weather, there's not a weather system on the planet that can outrace even the slowest general aviation airplane. Weather doesn't come to us, we go to weather. So if we're careful about keeping track of it, we really shouldn't be surprised by the weather coming in. We should know what we're going into. And I would say that if somebody is surprised by going into IFR weather, they really didn't do their homework. They really didn't do their planning very well. But again, proficiency. Get under the hood or get in a simulator and keep the instrument skills up. My experience is, and I've talked to other pilots who agree with me on this, the skill that deteriorates the fastest is the instrument scan. I know that that personally, if I would go a month without flying IFR or being under the hood or something, and then I'd take off and I'd end up going into the clouds, that first maybe 15, 20, 25 seconds that I was in the clouds, I was flying the airplane okay, but I wasn't comfortable. I just wasn't comfortable. It took me, and I was younger when I was doing it. I mean, it took me longer to get used to it. And then the scan came back. So, you know, if you go a year and you don't go in the clouds, and then all of a sudden you're in the clouds, that's not a good place to be. It's going to take you a while to get back. And we see a lot of accidents like that where the pilot just went into the IFR conditions and lost control very soon after the airplane. If as long as you've been trained at it and you can hang on to it for 30 seconds, you're probably going to be back and be doing okay. But proficiency is the key. Do the training. Even like a PCATD that a lot of flight schools have now, or FBOs have now. Buy a little time on it. It's cheaper than going out in the airplane. And actually, you can, personally, I think if it's a good device and you have a decent instructor with you, you can gain more in a half hour in a simulator than you can gain in an hour in the airplane, because you don't have to, fly all the way around to do an approach again. I mean, you can just back it up and do that, but that's just me. The airplane's more fun. I agree. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, I think so. There are a few more comments mostly, but do you have anything more to add to the slides, or?
Yeah, let's forge on. We're still talking now about the, I'll turn my webcam off again here. We're still talking about the King Air accident. What human factors do we have as a, let's see, no, I did that one, I'm sorry. Got ahead of myself, got behind myself. So in summary, is there anything in common among these accidents? Well, each of them had some element of get-there-itis. All three of the accidents we talked about had some element of get-there-itis in there. And there are some things that feed get-there-itis. I think we can see that there are several things in common. We only listed continuation bias for one of the accidents, but it's probably a factor in all of them to some extent. But here are the things that we talked about, and there's some common ground there. Many articles have been written in the mainstream press about how unsafe general aviation is. Statistically, that may be true, but general aviation is really as safe as we choose to make it. And by attending webinars like this, you're choosing to make it safer, and I thank you for that. All right, here's how you get to that webinar reference page. First, visit vectorsforsafety.com. That's the website. Then, it takes a second for it to load once you go to the page, but you'll see tabs at the top of that page, and select the Downloads/Links tab at the top of the page and click it right there. Click that. And then magically, the webinar information page for this event will appear. If it's not at the top, just scroll down a little bit and you'll find it's there, and there's all kinds of links and things on there. All right, in case you didn't know, Avemco offers a safety rewards program. Attendees at this event or any of my other events, or those who take any safety-related educational courses, can receive a percentage off their annual Avemco premium at the time of quote or renewal. All you have to do is let Avemco know. And please visit our website, vectorsforsafety.com. There are links to videos and to online courses. Most of the webinars in this series have been recorded and can be found in the videos section on that site. You can also join my mailing list to receive my free newsletter, Vectors for Safety. There's no advertising in it. It's just safety stuff. We already did discussion, I guess, so we're good on that. I have some books available. You can search Amazon for books by Gene Benson, or there are links from my personal website, genebenson.com. And thanks again to Raresh for his assistance, and thanks to all of you who have spent the time today to join us in the goal of being a safe pilot. As always, I say, please remember, fly like your life depends on it.